Are climate deniers dumb? This is Steve Gordonham. He's executive director of the Climate Science Coalition of America, author of 4 books on energy, climate change, and sustainable development. And one of these books, with over 100,000 copies in print. So it's a pleasure to have him here. Let me start. You sent to me 11 slides. So during the conversation, please ask to me to share, because in your comment, I can share the picture in screen, no problem.
Okay, great to join you again, Armando.
It's a pleasure. Steve, please. The President of the United States said something complicated to understand. Everyone who will fully denies the impact of climate change is really, really dumb, or has some other motive. Is he correct, Steve?
Now, this is something that is said quite a bit. He even went on to say that he said his political opposition, the Republicans, he said they don't think that climate change exists, which is completely a wrong statement. I've never met anyone I've been involved 15 years in looking at the climate now. I don't think I've ever met an educated person who doesn't think the climate changes.
Yeah.
So he's really either incorrect or distorting things. The real question is, what causes our climate to change? And I've written a couple books on that, and we have there's a lot of evidence that climate is dominated by nature, not power plants or sport utility vehicles. And these things that we experience, the climate of Earth varies powerfully and in extreme ways in many, many places. I understand you just had some major floods in the Rio Grande do Sul, and a lot of people died, and that's what happens with nature, and the really only a rational course is to adapt to the climate, to try and build buildings and structures and planes to control the structures to control the floods and those sorts of things. Not think that we can stop floods from occurring by building wind turbine towers. That's really a flawed a bit of logic.
2 points. You mentioned first that is much more related to nature than the human interference. So it's a very important statement. So we believe sometimes that humans are doing this bad job, but the other side, if you observe the nature, you can see nature doing standalone this process.
Yeah, well, that's if you look back in history in just about all locations, and I'm not sure about Brazil, but there's much history of flooding in the past, much history of drought. It just depends on the years and the decades, and the weather that we're seeing now is not abnormal in historical terms. So, but unfortunately, the people that are worried about climate change, every time we have a hurricane or a flood, they portray this as something that we are causing. It really is. It's really medieval in many ways. It's almost a superstition. And again, the best way to strengthen in the Caribbean, for example, is against hurricanes, is to build strong concrete structures for housing. Yeah. And we need to boost the income of those nations. And what Netherlands has done for many, many centuries is to build seawalls and build artificial islands to counteract issues with
right.
So that, go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead. No, in Rio Grande do Sul that you mentioned, the cities there are in the sea level, practically in the sea level. So a little bit of water, much more water, so comes to the cities. This is a problem. It's not a new problem. 1940, they had a very strong problem there. So it's not new. It's not the first time.
Do you know what the land is doing down there? Is it stable near the coast or is it subsiding? And the reason I ask is we have many locations in the eastern United States where the land is actually subsiding.
Exactly.
And
Like Holland, Netherlands.
yep, yeah, I'm not sure about Netherlands. I know that in Virginia and in South Carolina and Florida and eastern Texas, we have land that's subsiding. And so oceans have been rising about 7 or 8 inches per century.
Yeah.
But then if you add a subsidence of another 10 or 15 inches per century, you can come up with a pretty big change. And people can even affect some of this. There are some indications that taking fresh water out of the water table underneath land actually can contribute to subsidence.
Yeah.
So in Virginia now they're building a desalination plant to get fresh water from seawater, and they are actually injecting treated water back into the water table to try and keep the land from subsiding. So there are many factors often.
Yeah. Is there any picture related to that?
Nope,
No.
I don't have one for that. This is an ad lib discussion.
Yeah, perfect. There is hot weather in Europe, United
Yeah.
States, the north part of the Earth, and people blame fossil fuels as the cause of these problems. How do you see this?
Yeah, we have, for example, there's been some recent comments that heat waves are 35 times more likely, that sort of thing, because of man-made climate change. Again, these things, there's really no evidence that shows that sort of thing. You can put up a chart there about U.S. state high temperature records. We are having heat waves across the United States, but listeners in the U.S. or elsewhere want to find out about this can go to a database at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and they keep track of a thing called state extremes, which has the record high temperature, the record cold temperature, rainfall, other things. And one of the things that you find is that in the United States, 23 of the 50 state record high temperatures were set in the decade of the 1930s, about 90 years ago.
Those red ones?
Those are all the blue ones.
Blue ones.
The blue ones, those were all the record highs in those states. And then 36 of the 50 were set before 1975. And we've had a handful that have been set recently. But most of the indications are that we're not setting the state high temperature records in a accelerated way. The other thing that happens too is that 30, 40, 50 years ago, a lot of locations weren't measuring and tracking high temperature records. So now you say, well, in Abilene or somewhere, we now have a high temperature record. Well, they weren't tracking one 50 or 60 or 70 years ago. And so it looks like a lot more records are being set. But there's really not an indication that our climate is radically different. We have had a little bit of warming over the last 140 years since we've had thermometers, about 1 degree Celsius in the United States, probably about the same in central Brazil. We find that temperatures have actually been warming less as you get close to the equator. There's been less warming, and closer to the Arctic regions or the Antarctic regions, we find more particularly the Arctic in the north, we find more warming. Mm-hmm. Canada. This again is what nature is doing, not people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting.
You can,
yeah, sure.
Next slide on the Mendenhall Glacier, which is an example.
This one.
I often point out to audiences that it has been warmer many times in the past. This is one example. The Mendenhall Glacier is a glacier near Juneau, near Western Canada and Southeast Alaska. And it has been retreating for about a century. The environmental groups have put up pictures in airports that show the Mendenhall Glacier in 1880 and then in about 1910. And the glacier is receded and it's smaller. But about a decade ago, scientists from Southeast Alaska University went down inside ice caves under the glacier, and they found this image, and it's a little hard to make out, but there's a tree trunk right there, kind of a little left of center with a like a finger pointing up, about a foot wide in diameter. It's still got its roots in the ground, and they found many such tree stumps like this, still with roots in the ground. They radiocarbon dated them and found that they were 1,000 years old, which means that they grew up during a warm period called the medieval warm period. And so the evidence shows that where today we have a glacier, 1,000 years ago we had a forest, indicating that it was warmer 1,000 years ago than it is today.
Mhm. Mhm. But regarding to global warming, it seems that predictions and reality are not going together. They are very fast one for another. What's wrong?
Well, I think, the world has kind of jumped to a conclusion that humans are causing dangerous warming. This has been driven by the United Nations, a number of other groups. And there are many people that use the theory of man-made warming for other ends. The United Nations, for example, has wanted to be an environmental leader. That was one of their original goals 30, 40 years ago. They've used the theory of man-made warming to do that. They have wanted to redistribute wealth. And a great way to do that is to say that the wealthy nations, Europe and the United States, have to transfer wealth to poorer nations to help stop climate problems. And then a third big goal that they've talked about is establishing a world government. And Jacques Chirac, a past president of France, and I think it was in the 1980s, said that the early
Famous.
1990s, said that the first climate conference was an example of world government. So people use the fear of man-made warming for all sorts of things that they would like to accomplish in society.
Mhm. You defend, and it's in your book, your recent book, Green Breakdown, that the world is heading for a renewable energy failure. It's a
Yeah.
strong statement. I cannot understand very well the statement. Let me.
Well, predictions are always difficult, and I decided to go out onto a limb with that one. But as we've discussed before, the wealthy nations of the world, United States, Europe, and Canada, New Zealand, Australia, say we need to get to net zero emissions by 2050. And that means getting rid of all of coal, oil, and natural gas and shifting to biofuels and wind and solar. This just is not going to happen. This is an impossible goal. We might be able to do it with some utilities, but we have vast industries, chemicals and cement and fertilizer and steel and metals that all use hydrocarbons. All of our, about 95% of global transportation still uses hydrocarbons. Almost all of that is fuel from oil. Those things are not going to change quickly. So the idea that we're going to get to net zero just isn't going to occur. And I do think people are going to push back. We're starting to see it in the EV market as kind of an example. You can put up a slide.
You have a slide here. Yeah, let me
In
see.
the electric vehicle market there, yeah.
Ah.
In the last year, electric vehicles have sort of hit the wall in the United States and Europe. They're pretty flat. Sales in Europe are flat. They haven't increased this year. They're at about 14% market share. In the US, they're up about 4%, but they've lost share this year. They only have about 7% share. Last year was 9% of light vehicle sales. And we just have we had a study by McKinsey and Company, the big consulting firm in the U.S. They went around the world and asked thousands of EV owners, had survey questions, and one of the questions was, "Will you buy an EV as your next car?"
Oh my God!
46% of EV owners in the United States said no, they're more likely to go back to a fuel car. It was 49% in England, very high number. And around the world, an average of about 30% who would go back, and big problems were charging, issues with cold weather and other sorts of things. So electric vehicles are going to be part of our future. They're probably going to continue to get better and better and become bigger parts of the market. But we're a long, long way from a transition. and governments should not be forcing this to say that if we all buy an electric vehicle, we'll stop floods like in South Brazil. That's not going to occur.
Yeah, Brazil is not the same conditions. We do not have infrastructure enough to put electric vehicles to work. But we have ethanol, that's very strong, biodiesel, and other types of natural gas transformed in energy for cars and fuels. So it's different approach. Electric cars will take longer in Brazil,
Yep.
or not, or will stop before this that.
Probably so.
Yeah. Uh, Let me remove the slide. Please ask me to put the slide here. Let me check it because elections, United States now is a very big issue.
Yeah.
The Democrat candidates may continue or not, and the the tentative to murder President Trump, former President Trump was terrible, and but the Republican candidate. Says something that make me scary. He said
Okay.
that if he win, he would stop the flow of subsidies for green programs in the
Yes,
U.S.
he did
Oh,
say.
I don't believe. I don't believe.
Well, he was in Wisconsin and said that recently. So what has happened in the United States is we have vast amounts of federal money now going to green industries. And many of these industries would not exist without all this money. Back in 2010, 2013, during the Obama administration, about $15 billion a year were going to wind, solar, and biofuels. It went down during the first Trump administration. It's come back up over during President Biden's presidency. And then they passed this Inflation Reduction Act measure, which just is going to put just tens of billions. The Cato Institute is estimating for fiscal year 2025 that $80 billion in subsidies is going to go to renewables. It's just a vast amount. And so we have all sorts of things, like we have carbon dioxide pipelines they're arguing about in the Midwest states, carbon dioxide capture and storage. These things would not exist without all this money. That's why they're doing it, to get the federal money. Many of these charging stations, there is no company in the U.S. that can break even on a charging station. They all lose money. They all are relying on federal and state subsidies. And then they want to create this green hydrogen fuel industry from scratch by doing electrolysis of water and producing hydrogen. Very, very electricity intensive. Again, there's no market for these things. This is all created to try and fight man-made climate change. Anyway, Mr. Trump has said he believes in climate change, but he doesn't think people are doing it. And he said he's going to put a stop to not the payments that have already been made, but a lot of new ones. He's going to try and shut those down. And if that occurs, we're going to have dozens of projects canceled. A lot of companies go bankrupt. It's going to be a big, big transition. So it is a pretty big deal on who wins the next election.
Because in Europe, England, UK, France, Germany, they are putting money as subsidies for green
Yes.
programs. In Brazil,
Yes.
we have money to green programs. Of course, it's not the same level of these other countries, developed countries, but we have. So this is a trend that lobbyists and people that force money to flow to some kind
Yep.
of firms, enterprises, is a very, very complicated issue. No doubt.
It's
No
very
doubt.
big this year. Or last year it was, I think, I can't remember the company that estimated it, but they said $1.8 trillion last year in terms of green money flows and tax credits and subsidies and all this money being invested. Just huge amounts. And we have so many other problems to solve around the world. We have untreated wastewater we need to handle. Sometimes I talk about Brazil. There was a story about when they held the Olympics, 7 or 8 years ago,
Uh-huh.
and the swimmers were saying we don't really want to swim in this water. Well, I understand Brazil is now Brazil's now building water treatment plants, which is great, but much of the world, that's still a big issue. We have plastic in the ocean, about 100 million tons of plastic. It's overstated a little bit, the problem, but we're adding 10 million tons a year. I can send you a video of this picture in India, what they're doing, and literally you see truck after truck full of waste and trash driving up onto a bridge and dumping it over the side into this river. And it's not one truck; it's truck after truck after truck. And so, we need to get funding toward proper handling of waste, toward disease, toward boosting the income of people, making systems and buildings resilient. Instead of going after carbon dioxide, that's really a big waste of money. And let's solve the real problems of the world.
Yeah. Steve, it's something weird for me because International Energy Agency, one of the main metrics that they use to measure green projects is the amount of investment they are doing in in solar and wind. But the amount of investment is not a metric; is the input. The metric is the result of energy obtained from. So I cannot believe I see Mr. Birol showing now we are increasing the investments. No, my God, I wanted to see how much energy are we recovering for this investment, and they do not show this.
That's exactly right. Or what is the result? And I've used an analogy. It's like raising an army and never taking a hill, or building a hospital and never serving a patient. Just as long as we spend all this money, they think that's an accomplishment. And there is no evidence that sea level or storms or temperatures are going to be affected in any way by all this spending. Again, because nature is dominating climate and temperatures, not what humans are doing. But it does create huge industries that just are built on all this money. So, it's a very tough thing. I think we're going to get down the road here in a decade or two. We might even get to some global cooling. It's very possible. It's tough to predict the temperature of the Earth, and it moves in cycles. And we get a decade or two of cooling, and it's going to be very difficult to support all this crazy stuff they're doing.
Yeah, that's right. You have more. I'm not sure about. Do you have your books in your hands, or over your table, or to show the cover of them for us?
Well, they're behind me, if you can see. In the top right is the green breakdown, the coming renewable energy failure. And on the left is climatism. And if I scroll down a little, let's see, I got to kind of get out of the way. There's more books here. And they have these. Now you had one chart there. Why don't you put the last one up? You're going to put up one of the things I have.
Chart.
The end is near. This no, the end is near. It's kind of in the middle. Keep going back. There's one. Now, this is an example of one of the sidebars in my book. These are predictions that were made about what was going to happen with global warming. And this was in 1970. Time magazine said, quote, "Scientists have solid experimental and theoretical evidence to support the following prediction. By 1985, air pollution will have reduced the amount of sunlight reaching Earth by 1/2. So I have a whole bunch of these things that never happened. And obviously we have pollution problems, but humanity has done a great job of reducing air pollution in many, many nations. And as nations get wealthier, they continue to do a good job in reducing air pollution. So China is a recent example. Their air pollution has started to fall, their particulate pollution. So in my books, I have all these sidebars that have point out what's going on with headlines, point out predictions that didn't occur, and it makes for pretty good reading for readers.
You mentioned something related to that question that I will do now. Plastics, debris, used materials. What's the comparison you can do with climate change? What's worse?
Well, I think the plastics is a bigger issue. I mean, that's something that we do. We put the plastic into the ocean. We need to have biodegradable plastics, I think, is the ultimate solution. things
but
that
is there something real in this solution of biodegrade? No.
we have people working on recycling, as I think you know, but it's expensive for companies. We have in the United States, they're doing things like banning straws in restaurants, plastic straws, which is, again, compared to dumping truckloads, a truckload a minute in India into the river. A few straws in Chicago aren't going to have much difference. But I think the world will get on top of this. We'll probably have biodegradable plastics more and more in the next few decades that degrade in the sun. And the thing you have to avoid is leaving your plastic milk carton out in the sun, which wouldn't be good. But so it will help. It will help with that problem globally. But that's a real pollution issue that needs to be solved. And not carbon dioxide. That's carbon dioxide is great for the forests, great for the Amazon forest, great for everything else. Makes the plants grow. We should not be trying to stop carbon dioxide emissions.
Perfect. Well, I have a last question for you. It's a tricky question, very complicated question for you, but I must do that. Are you ready to replace the Democrat candidate to run on November? Are you ready to replace him?
Well, I try not to be political in these things. I do think the Democratic Party is off base with their push for global warming and some other sorts of things. So we'll kind of let the election go as it goes. I'm officially an independent, but I think the country is aiming to go in a different direction. And I think at this point, I think Mr. Biden will be voted out. We'll just see what happens after that.
Yeah.
But it's going to make for a big change. But there are many Republicans, by the way, that think we're causing dangerous global warming as well. And so I try and criticize them when that doesn't make sense. And again, we need to get back to solving real pollution issues, real poverty issues, disease issues, those sorts of things, and not trying to get rid of the carbon dioxide problem.
That's a very good point. So, are there people, enthusiastic people in Republican Party to the green energy, to these investments? Are there only a little quantity or amount? What amount of people?
Well, often the position of the Republican Party is, well, we think there's climate change, but it's just too expensive. We think there's global warming, but it's just too expensive, is what they say. When the real bottom line is climate is dominated by nature, not what your car is doing, which is, it's very tough to prove that kind of argument because climate is very uncertain, just as it is tough to say that the storms are getting stronger. It's just that right now the folks that believe in the ideology of climatism have the upper hand, have the ear of the press, the United Nations, many other groups. So the Republicans, it's tough to take the position that we're not causing dangerous climate change, and then everybody calls you a denier.
Yeah.
So,
and this is your book, the Green Breakdown, that you mentioned before.
Yeah, I get my books from my website, Steve Gorham, GOREHAM.com. I'll send them a signed copy. But there are a whole lot of fun things in these books, as well as having the science and the economics. Like the story they ran in the Miami Herald that global warming was causing men and women to cheat on each other, and so you now have a new excuse, honey. The climate change made me do it. But
and is it available in Kindle format too?
Yes, my last 3 books are ebooks as well, and
Amazon Kindle,
and Amazon as well. Yeah.
Okay.
This one's been an Amazon bestseller several times. Top in the energy policy category several times in the last few months. I think it's number 7 now, but good book.
Perfect. Steve Gorham, was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank
Great
you, Armando.
conversation.
Okay.
Thank you.
All the best.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too.